I had spent 43 years perfecting my grandmother's apple cinnamon rolls recipe, and watching my daughter-in-law Jessica mock it as outdated peasant food felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But what she didn't know was that the woman standing beside me in my old kitchen, quietly taking notes while Jessica laughed, would soon become my business partner in a $1 million bakery empire. If this story touches you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Stories like mine show that sometimes what others discard can become our greatest treasure. My name is Linda, I'm 62 years old, and I've been the backbone of this family for decades. My kitchen has always been the heart of our home here in suburban Denver, Colorado. The worn wooden countertops tell stories of countless family meals, holiday preparations, and quiet moments shared over steaming mugs of coffee. The faded floral wallpaper that my late husband Bob installed 20 years ago might look dated to some, but to me, it represents stability, warmth, and the foundation I built for my children. I raised 3 kids in this house, Michael, Sarah, and David. Michael, my eldest at 38, married Jessica 5 years ago, and that's when everything started to change. Jessica comes from what she calls a more sophisticated background. Her father owns a chain of upscale restaurants, and she graduated from culinary school. She never lets us forget either of these facts. Before Jessica entered our lives, Michael used to spend Sunday mornings with me in this kitchen. We'd make my grandmother's apple cinnamon rolls together, a tradition that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family. Michael would measure the flour while I shared stories about great-grandmother Eleanor, who brought this recipe from Sweden in 1892. Those rolls weren't just food, they were our family's history kneaded into every fold of dough. The recipe itself is deceptively simple, but it's the technique that makes all the difference. The dough needs to be worked just enough to develop the gluten, but not so much that it becomes tough. The filling is a careful balance of brown sugar, cinnamon, and a secret ingredient that my grandmother discovered by accident: a tablespoon of maple syrup that caramelizes during baking and creates this incredible depth of flavor. The rolls have to rise in a warm, draft-free environment for exactly 45 minutes. No more, no less. But Jessica had other ideas about what constituted real cooking. She arrived at family gatherings with elaborate dishes featuring ingredients I couldn't pronounce, photographing everything for her Instagram food blog. She'd critique the seasoning in my pot roast, suggest improvements to my famous chocolate chip cookies, and roll her eyes whenever I mentioned family recipes. The first time she openly mocked my apple cinnamon rolls was during last year's Thanksgiving. I had made 3 dozen of them, as was tradition, arranging them in my grandmother's antique serving baskets. Jessica took 1 bite, made a face, and announced to the entire table, "Linda, these are so heavy and dense." At culinary school, we learned that modern pastries should be light and airy. This is more like peasant food, filling, but not sophisticated. I felt the blood drain from my face. My daughter Sarah shot Jessica a warning look, but Michael just sat there, saying nothing. That was always Michael's way, avoiding confrontation, even when his wife was insulting his mother. Jessica continued, "I mean, I appreciate the sentiment, but maybe it's time to update these old recipes for the 21st century. The room fell silent. My other children and their families continued eating the rolls enthusiastically, but the damage was done. Later that night, as I cleaned up the kitchen alone, I found myself questioning everything. Were my recipes really outdated? Was I holding on to the past while the world moved forward? But then I remembered my grandmother Eleanor's hands, weathered from years of hard work, teaching me to fold the dough. I remembered my mother standing in this same kitchen during the Depression, making these rolls stretch our grocery budget. I remembered Michael as a little boy, flour in his hair, proudly presenting his misshapen but perfectly flavored attempts. These weren't just recipes. They were our family's DNA. Things got worse over the following months. Jessica began hosting what she called sophisticated dinner parties at their house, deliberately scheduling them during our traditional family mealtimes. She'd post photos of her elaborate creations on social media, hashtagging them with phrases like elevating family cuisine and modern comfort food. The implication was clear. My cooking was inferior, outdated, something to be improved upon or replaced. Michael became increasingly distant. He stopped coming to Sunday morning baking sessions, claiming he was too busy with work. When I'd call to invite them for dinner, Jessica would often answer and politely decline, saying they had other plans or that they were trying to eat healthier. She'd recommend nutrition articles to me, suggesting that my heavy traditional cooking wasn't suitable for their lifestyle. The breaking point came 6 months ago, during Easter dinner. I had spent days preparing all of Michael's childhood favorites: honey-glazed ham, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and of course my apple cinnamon rolls for dessert. Jessica arrived carrying a store-bought organic cake, announcing that she'd brought a lighter alternative to my carb-heavy dessert. When it came time for dessert, Jessica made a show of serving her cake first, explaining to everyone about the health benefits of reduced sugar and the importance of portion control. When my daughter-in-law, from David's side, Maria, complimented my rolls and asked for the recipe, Jessica actually laughed out loud. "Oh, honey," Jessica said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Those recipes are from a different era. They're full of butter and sugar. Basically, heart attacks on a plate. If you want to learn real pastry techniques, I can recommend some modern cookbooks that focus on healthier ingredients and contemporary methods." I watched Maria's face fall. She had been genuinely interested in connecting with our family traditions, and Jessica had just humiliated her. But what hurt most was seeing Michael nod in agreement with his wife. My own son, who had spent countless mornings learning these very recipes, was now ashamed of them. That night, I called my friend Dorothy, who had been my neighbor for 30 years. Through tears, I told her what had happened. Dorothy listened patiently, then said something that surprised me. "Linda, have you ever thought about doing something with those recipes? I mean, really doing something with them?" I didn't understand what she meant at first. Dorothy explained that her niece, Margaret Chen, was a successful food entrepreneur who specialized in helping people turn family recipes into businesses. Margaret had recently moved to Denver and was looking for authentic, traditional recipes with stories behind them. "She's not interested in fancy culinary school creations," Dorothy said. "She wants real food with real history." I was hesitant. At 62, starting a business seemed impossible. But Dorothy convinced me to at least meet Margaret. "What's the worst that could happen? She says no, and you're right where you are now." 2 weeks later, Margaret Chen walked into my kitchen. She was in her early 40s, professionally dressed but with kind eyes that reminded me of my grandmother. She had built 3 successful artisanal bakeries in California before moving to Colorado for a change of pace. What struck me most was how she listened, really listened, as I told her about my family's recipes and the traditions behind them. Margaret asked to see my recipe collection. I pulled out my grandmother's handwritten recipe cards, yellowed with age, and my own notebooks filled with modifications and improvements I'd made over the years. She handled them with reverence, reading each one carefully, asking questions about techniques and ingredients. Then I offered to make the apple cinnamon rolls. Margaret watched intently as I worked, taking notes on everything: the way I tested the water temperature for the yeast, how I kneaded the dough, the specific way I rolled and cut the pastries. When they came out of the oven, golden brown and filling the kitchen with their incredible aroma, Margaret took a bite and closed her eyes. "Linda," she said quietly, "this is extraordinary. The texture, the flavor balance, the way the maple syrup caramelizes, this is artisan-level baking. How long did you say your family has been making these?" I told her about great-grandmother Eleanor, about the recipe's journey from Sweden to America, about 4 generations of women perfecting the technique. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "These aren't just recipes," she said. "They're edible history, and that's exactly what the market is craving right now." Margaret explained that there was a growing demand for authentic traditional baked goods with real stories behind them. Corporate bakeries dominated the market with mass-produced items, but consumers were increasingly seeking genuine, artisanal products. Your recipes represent something that can't be replicated in a factory or learned in culinary school, she said. They represent heritage, authenticity, and generations of perfected technique. Over the next month, Margaret and I met regularly. She helped me document my recipes properly, translating my intuitive measurements and techniques into precise instructions that could be replicated consistently. We experimented with scaling up production while maintaining quality. Most importantly, she helped me understand the business side of food production: licensing, insurance, commercial kitchen requirements, marketing. Margaret proposed a partnership. She would handle the business operations, marketing, and distribution, while I would be the head baker and the face of the brand. We would start with my apple cinnamon rolls and gradually introduce other family recipes. The brand would be called Eleanor's Kitchen, honoring my great-grandmother and the tradition she started. Meanwhile, Jessica continued her campaign to modernize our family's food culture. She started a food blog called Elevating Tradition, where she posted improved versions of classic family recipes. One post was particularly galling. She had attempted to recreate my apple cinnamon rolls, substituting almond flour for regular flour, agave nectar for brown sugar, and coconut oil for butter. The photos showed pale, dense lumps that bore no resemblance to the golden, fluffy perfection of the original recipe. In the comments, she wrote, "Sometimes we need to rescue family recipes from outdated techniques and unhealthy ingredients. These guilt-free cinnamon rolls prove that tradition can be honored while embracing modern nutritional knowledge." I showed the post to Margaret, who shook her head in amazement. "She's completely missed the point," Margaret said. "Those ingredients don't just provide flavor, they're what makes the recipe work. The butter creates the tender crumb structure, the brown sugar provides the perfect moisture content, and the regular flour has the right protein level for the texture. She's basically created a completely different product and called it an improvement." But I was learning not to let Jessica's opinions affect me anymore. Margaret and I were busy preparing for our launch. We had secured a commercial kitchen space, obtained all necessary permits and licenses, and developed our initial production plan. Margaret's marketing expertise was incredible. She had created a brand story that honored my family's heritage while appealing to modern consumers who valued authenticity and craftsmanship. Our first major break came when Margaret arranged for us to supply a local coffee shop with fresh apple cinnamon rolls 3 times a week. The owner, Tom, was initially skeptical. He had tried several bakery suppliers and was never satisfied with the quality. But when he tasted our rolls, his expression changed completely. "These are incredible," he said, taking another bite. "The flavor is so complex, and the texture is perfect. Not too sweet, not too heavy. Where did you learn to make these?" I told him the story, and Tom was fascinated. He immediately agreed to feature our rolls as his signature pastry item, and he wanted to display a small sign telling the story of the recipe's heritage. Within 2 weeks, his customers were specifically coming in to buy our cinnamon rolls. Some people started calling ahead to make sure they wouldn't sell out. Word spread quickly through Denver's food community. Margaret leveraged her industry connections to arrange tastings with other coffee shops, restaurants, and specialty food stores. The response was universally positive. Chefs and food buyers praised the authentic flavor and superior texture of our products. Several asked if we had other family recipes they could feature. By this time, I hadn't spoken to Michael and Jessica in months. They had stopped attending family gatherings, claiming they were too busy with their own social circle. Jessica's Instagram showed a constant stream of trendy restaurant visits and elaborate home-cooked meals that looked beautiful but somehow sterile. Meanwhile, my other children, Sarah and David, were incredibly supportive of my new venture. They helped with deliveries, spread word among their friends, and Sarah even designed our initial logo. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of family drama and unexpected success. I promise this story gets even more surprising from here. The real turning point came 4 months after our launch. Margaret had entered our apple cinnamon rolls in the Colorado Artisan Food Competition, a prestigious event that attracted food professionals from across the region. I was nervous about competing against formally trained pastry chefs and established bakeries. But Margaret was confident. The competition was held at the Colorado Convention Center with hundreds of entries across various categories. Our roles were in the traditional heritage baked goods category, competing against items from bakeries that had been in business for decades. As we set up our display, I noticed several competitors eyeing our simple presentation with what looked like dismissive smirks. But when the judges began their tasting rounds, everything changed. I watched as they approached our table, took bites of our rolls, and then paused. Their expressions shifted from professional neutrality to genuine surprise and delight. They asked detailed questions about our recipe's history, the techniques involved, and the story behind the brand. One judge, a prominent Denver chef named Robert Martinez, took a second bite and said, "This is what authentic tastes like. You can't fake this kind of depth and complexity. This recipe has been loved and perfected over generations, and you can taste every bit of that care." When they announced the winners that evening, I held my breath. Third place went to a well-known German bakery. Second place went to a French patisserie that had been featured in multiple food magazines. And first place went to Eleanor's Kitchen. As I walked to the stage to accept our award, I saw Margaret beaming with pride. The MC read a description of our entry. Eleanor's Kitchen's apple cinnamon rolls represent the perfect marriage of heritage and craftsmanship. These are not just pastries, they're edible family history, showcasing techniques that have been refined over 4 generations. The judges were unanimous in their appreciation for the authentic flavor profile and superior texture that can only be achieved through time-honored methods and genuine passion. The award came with significant local media coverage. The Denver Post food section featured a full article about our story, complete with photos of me in my home kitchen and the historical recipe cards. Local television news stations picked up the story, framing it as "Grandmother's Recipe Becomes Award-Winning Business." Margaret fielded calls from food distributors, restaurant chains, and even a publisher interested in a cookbook deal. But the most satisfying moment came the next morning. I was in my kitchen, preparing for another production day, when my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain, "I saw the news story about your business. I had no idea you were doing all this." I waited for him to continue, not making it easy for him. "The reporter mentioned that you've been working on this for months. Why didn't you tell us?" The question hung in the air. How could I explain that I had tried to share my passion for cooking with them, only to be dismissed and mocked? How could I tell him that his wife had made me feel ashamed of the very traditions that were now earning recognition and success? "Michael," I said carefully, "I've been trying to share my cooking with you for years. But Jessica made it very clear that she considered my recipes outdated and inferior. I didn't think you'd be interested in my peasant food." There was a long silence. Finally, Michael said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I know Jessica can be critical, but I never meant to make you feel like your cooking wasn't appreciated. Those Sunday mornings we spent baking together are some of my favorite memories." It was a start, but I wasn't ready to forgive easily. "Michael, when Maria asked for my recipe at Easter, Jessica laughed at her. She humiliated both of us, and you sat there and said nothing. You even nodded when she called my food unhealthy." "I know," he said quietly. "I was wrong. I was trying to keep the peace, but I should have stood up for you, for our family traditions." Before I could respond, I heard Jessica's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. Michael covered the phone, but I could hear muffled arguing. When he came back on the line, his voice was strained. "Mom, Jessica wants to talk to you." I was tempted to hang up, but curiosity got the better of me. Jessica's voice came through the phone, artificially bright and cheerful. "Linda, congratulations on your little award. I had no idea you were starting a side business. It's so cute that you're finally monetizing your hobby." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She was still treating my success as quaint and insignificant, even after the media coverage and industry recognition. "It's not a hobby, Jessica," I said firmly. "It's a business, and it's not little. We're already supplying 8 locations across Denver, and we have a waiting list of restaurants wanting to carry our products. "Oh, that's wonderful," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe me. "I'm sure it's a fun way to stay busy. Actually, I was thinking, maybe I could help you modernize some of your other recipes. Make them more appealing to contemporary palates. I could even feature them on my blog as part of my Elevating Tradition series." I felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time it was mixed with something new: confidence. Months of working with Margaret, receiving validation from industry professionals, and seeing the genuine appreciation of customers had rebuilt my self-worth. I was no longer the insecure woman who questioned her abilities after Jessica's criticism. "Thank you, but no," I said calmly. "My recipes don't need to be modernized or elevated. They've been perfected over 4 generations, and they just won first place in a competition judged by professional chefs. I think they're exactly where they need to be." Jessica's laugh was forced. "Well, of course they're good for what they are. I just meant that there might be ways to make them more sophisticated, appeal to a broader market." "Jessica," I interrupted, "the broader market is exactly what we're appealing to. We can't keep up with demand. In fact, we're expanding to a larger commercial kitchen next month and hiring additional staff." There was silence on the other end. I could practically hear Jessica processing this information, trying to reconcile her view of my peasant food with the reality of its commercial success. That's really great, Linda," she said finally, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "I'm sure it will do well in the local market." After I hung up, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. Jessica's approval no longer mattered to me. Her opinion of my cooking had been replaced by the validation of customers who lined up to buy our products, chefs who praised our quality, and industry judges who recognized our excellence. Over the next few months, Eleanor's Kitchen continued to grow beyond our wildest expectations. We expanded our product line to include my grandmother's Swedish butter cookies, my mother's banana bread, and my own signature chocolate chip cookies. Each product came with its own story, its own piece of family history that resonated with customers who were hungry for authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. Margaret's business acumen was extraordinary. She negotiated contracts with a regional grocery chain to carry our products in their bakery sections. She arranged for us to cater corporate events and wedding receptions. Most significantly, she connected us with a specialty food distributor who wanted to take our products to markets in California, Texas, and Arizona. The success brought unexpected opportunities. The Food Network reached out about featuring us in a segment about family businesses. A publisher offered a substantial advance for a cookbook combining our recipes with their family stories. Margaret was fielding inquiries from investors interested in helping us franchise the concept. But success also brought challenges. We needed to scale up production significantly while maintaining the handcrafted quality that set us apart. We had to balance growth with preserving the personal touch that made our story authentic. Most importantly, we had to stay true to the recipes and techniques that made our products special, resisting the temptation to take shortcuts or compromise quality for efficiency. Through it all, Margaret proved to be more than just a business partner. She became a true friend. She understood that this venture was about more than money for me. It was about validation, legacy, and proving that traditional knowledge had value in the modern world. She protected our family recipes as fiercely as I did, ensuring that any adaptations for commercial production preserved the essential character of the originals. The most rewarding aspect wasn't the financial success, though that was certainly gratifying. It was the connection we made with customers who shared their own family food memories with us. Elderly women would tear up while telling me how our apple cinnamon rolls reminded them of their own grandmothers. Young mothers would ask for advice on starting their own family traditions. Food service workers would share stories of customers specifically requesting our products by name. 6 months after winning the competition, we received an invitation that changed everything. The James Beard Foundation was hosting a special event celebrating heritage recipes in modern America, and they wanted Eleanor's Kitchen to be one of the featured participants. This wasn't just recognition, it was validation from the highest levels of the culinary world. The event was held in Chicago, with food professionals, media representatives, and culinary enthusiasts from across the country. Margaret and I prepared hundreds of our apple cinnamon rolls, along with samples of our other products and materials telling our family's story. As we set up our booth, I noticed several attendees reading the storyboards Margaret had created, which detailed the journey of our recipes from Sweden to America and through 4 generations of women. People were genuinely moved by the narrative, and many shared their own family food stories with us. The highlight of the evening came when James Beard award-winning chef Daniel Boulud stopped at our booth. He tasted our apple cinnamon roll thoughtfully, asking detailed questions about our techniques. After learning about our family's heritage and the recipe's history, he nodded approvingly. "This is what America tastes like," he said. "Not the manufactured version, but the real thing. Immigrant families bringing their traditions and perfecting them over generations. This is the food that built this country." His words were quoted in several food magazines, providing validation that extended far beyond our local market. Orders began coming in from restaurants and specialty food stores across the country. Margaret started planning a national distribution strategy, while I focused on training additional bakers to maintain our quality standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica, with her culinary school training and sophisticated palate, had dismissed my recipes as outdated peasant food. Yet here I was, being celebrated by the country's most prestigious culinary organization for preserving and sharing those very same traditions. A week after returning from Chicago, I received another call from Michael. This time, his voice was different, humble, almost ashamed. "Mom, I need to apologize, really apologize. I've been following the coverage of your business, and I'm starting to understand what I've missed." "What we've missed?" I listened as he continued, his words coming in a rush as if he'd been holding them back for months. "I saw the James Beard Foundation article. I read what Chef Boulud said about your food representing authentic America. And I remembered those Sunday mornings, learning to make cinnamon rolls with you, hearing stories about great-grandmother Eleanor. I threw all of that away because Jessica convinced me it wasn't sophisticated enough." He paused, and I could hear the regret in his voice. "The truth is, I miss those mornings. I miss learning about our family through your stories. I miss feeling connected to something bigger than myself. Jessica's food might look beautiful on Instagram, but it doesn't have soul. It doesn't have history. It doesn't have love." For the first time in months, I felt my anger toward Michael beginning to soften. But I wasn't ready to let him off the hook completely. "Michael, you hurt me deeply. When Jessica mocked my cooking, you stood by and let it happen. When she humiliated Maria for wanting to learn our family recipes, you said nothing. You made me feel ashamed of traditions that are now being celebrated nationally." "I know," he said quietly. "I was a coward. I chose the easy path instead of standing up for what I knew was right. And now I've missed out on being part of something amazing that you built from scratch." I could hear Jessica in the background again, her voice sharp and insistent. Michael covered the phone for several minutes, and when he returned, he sounded exhausted. "Mom, Jessica thinks this whole thing is being blown out of proportion. She says it's just local recognition that's been amplified by feel-good media coverage. She still thinks your recipes need updating for modern tastes." The old me might have been hurt by Jessica's continued dismissiveness. But now, armed with professional validation and commercial success, I felt only pity for her inability to understand what she was missing. "Michael," I said firmly, "Jessica is entitled to her opinion. But her opinion doesn't change the facts. Our products are selling faster than we can make them. Professional chefs are praising our quality. The James Beard Foundation is featuring us in their cookbook. We're expanding to 6 states by the end of the year." I paused, letting the weight of those achievements sink in. More importantly, we're preserving family traditions and sharing them with people who appreciate their value. We're creating jobs for local bakers. We're supporting other family farms by sourcing our ingredients locally. This isn't just about food, it's about community, heritage, and keeping authentic traditions alive. Michael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, is there any way? Could I maybe come by sometime? Maybe you could teach me to make the cinnamon rolls again? I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to be part of this somehow. Part of our family's story." I thought about his request carefully. Part of me wanted to punish him for the months of dismissal and neglect. But a larger part remembered the little boy who used to stand on a stool beside me, carefully measuring flour and listening to stories about his ancestors. "Michael, you're always welcome in my kitchen," I said finally. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about learning recipes. It's about respecting our family's heritage. It's about understanding that some things don't need to be improved or modernized. They need to be cherished and preserved." "I understand," he said quickly. "I want to learn everything, the recipes, the stories, the traditions. I want to be able to pass them on to my own children someday." "What about Jessica?" I asked pointedly. Another long pause. "I don't know," he admitted. "This whole experience has made me realize how much she's changed me, how much I've changed. I used to love our family traditions, and somehow I let her convince me they weren't good enough." 3 days later, Michael appeared at my kitchen door on a Sunday morning, looking uncertain but hopeful. I had prepared the ingredients for apple cinnamon rolls, just like old times. As we worked together, measuring flour and sharing stories, I watched him remember why these traditions had meant so much to him. He was rusty at first, his kneading technique clumsy after years away from the kitchen. But muscle memory gradually returned, and with it, a sense of connection to something larger than himself. As we waited for the dough to rise, I told him about the business side of Eleanor's kitchen, the challenges of scaling up production, the joy of connecting with customers, the pride of seeing our family's legacy recognized professionally. "I can't believe you built all this," he said, watching me shape the rolls with practiced efficiency. "And I can't believe I almost missed it entirely." When Jessica called during our baking session, Michael sent it to voicemail. When she texted asking where he was, he simply replied that he was learning about his family's heritage. The old Michael would have made excuses or cut the visit short to avoid conflict. This Michael chose to stay. As our cinnamon rolls baked, filling the kitchen with their incredible aroma, Michael opened up about his marriage. He admitted that Jessica's constant criticism had extended beyond my cooking to other aspects of his life. She questioned his career choices, his friendships, even his relationship with his siblings. She had gradually isolated him from family traditions and connections that had once brought him joy. "I thought I was becoming more sophisticated," he said sadly, "but really, I was just becoming more disconnected from everything that mattered to me." When the timer rang and we pulled golden brown rolls from the oven, Michael took a bite and closed his eyes. "This is exactly how I remember them," he said. "How did I ever think these needed improvement?" We spent the afternoon planning how he might become involved with Eleanor's kitchen. Margaret would need to approve any family involvement, of course, but there were possibilities. Helping with local deliveries, assisting with farmers' market booths, even learning the business side of operations. Most importantly, we talked about preserving our family's food traditions for future generations. Michael expressed regret that he had no children yet to pass the recipes to. But I reminded him that traditions can be shared with nieces, nephews, and chosen family members. The key was keeping the knowledge alive and treating it with the respect it deserved. As evening approached and Michael prepared to leave, he asked the question I had been expecting. "Mom, what should I tell Jessica about today?" I considered my response carefully. "Tell her the truth," I said finally. "Tell her that you spent the day reconnecting with your family's heritage. Tell her that you remembered why these traditions matter to you. And tell her that you hope she can learn to appreciate them too, but that your involvement with Eleanor's kitchen isn't conditional on her approval." Michael nodded, understanding the deeper message. He was going to have to choose between preserving his family connections and maintaining peace in his marriage. I couldn't make that choice for him, but I could make it clear that our family's traditions would continue with or without Jessica's blessing. Over the following weeks, Michael became a regular presence in my kitchen and at Eleanor's kitchen events. He threw himself into learning not just the recipes, but the stories behind them, the techniques that made them special, and the business principles that were making them successful. Margaret was initially skeptical of involving family members, but Michael's genuine enthusiasm and willingness to start at the bottom won her over. Jessica's reaction was predictably negative. She accused Michael of regressing and wasting time on nostalgic nonsense when he could be focusing on his career advancement. She refused to taste anything he brought home from our baking sessions, dismissing them as those heavy old recipes before they even left the container. The tension in their marriage became increasingly obvious. Michael would arrive at my house stressed and exhausted from arguments at home. Jessica had started making ultimatums. Either he could waste time with his hobby baking, or he could focus on their relationship, but not both. The crisis came 6 weeks later, during our monthly Eleanor's Kitchen team meeting. Margaret, Michael, and I were discussing expansion plans when my phone rang. It was Jessica, and she was furious. "Linda, this has gone far enough," she said without preamble. "Michael is spending more time in your kitchen than in his own home. This little bakery hobby is destroying our marriage." I put the phone on speaker so Margaret and Michael could hear. Jessica continued her tirade, unaware that she had an audience. "I've tolerated this nonsense long enough, but now it's affecting Michael's career. He's turning down networking opportunities and business dinners to play around with old recipes. It's embarrassing." "Jessica," I said calmly, "Michael is an adult who can make his own choices about how to spend his time." "Choices influenced by your manipulation," she snapped. "You've guilt-tripped him into this ridiculous obsession with family traditions. He was perfectly happy with our lifestyle before you started this attention-seeking business venture." Margaret raised her eyebrows at the attention-seeking comment, but I kept my voice level. "Jessica, our business isn't a hobby or a venture. It's a successful company that's expanding nationally. We're employing 12 people and generating 6-figure revenues. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why." "6 figures?" Jessica's voice rose an octave. "You're making that much money selling those outdated cookies?" "We're making that much money honoring family traditions and meeting market demand for authentic, high-quality products," I corrected. "Something you dismissed as worthless peasant food is now being distributed in 6 states and featured in national food magazines." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Jessica spoke again, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Fine. If this business is so successful, maybe it's time for Michael to choose. Either he commits fully to our life together, or he can commit to your little bakery empire. But he can't do both." Michael, who had been listening to his wife's ultimatum with growing disbelief, finally spoke up. "Jessica, you're on speakerphone, and you just made my choice very easy." The sharp intake of breath from the phone told us Jessica realized her mistake. She had expected to have this conversation privately, to manipulate Michael away from his family commitments without witnesses. "Michael, I didn't know," she started. "You didn't know I was here, listening to you dismiss something that's brought meaning back into my life," he said firmly. "You didn't know that Margaret and my mother could hear you trying to force me to choose between my family and your approval." Margaret discreetly moved to another room, giving us privacy for what was clearly becoming a family crisis. But Michael continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Jessica, for months I've watched you mock my mother's cooking, dismiss our family traditions, and try to convince me that everything I grew up cherishing was inferior to your sophisticated preferences. I let you do it because I wanted to keep peace, but I won't let you force me to abandon my family again." "That's not what I'm doing," Jessica protested. "I just think you're getting obsessed with something that's not important in the grand scheme of things." "Not important?" Michael's voice was incredulous. "My mother built a successful business from scratch at age 62. She's preserving 4 generations of family recipes and sharing them with thousands of people. She's employing people and supporting local farmers. How is any of that not important? I felt a surge of pride hearing my son defend not just my business, but the values and traditions I had tried to instill in him. The boy who used to measure flour beside me had grown into a man who understood what really mattered. "Michael, please," Jessica's voice turned pleading. "Come home so we can discuss this privately. I didn't mean to sound so harsh. I'm just worried about your priorities." "My priorities are fine," Michael said quietly. "In fact, they're clearer now than they've been in years. I'm not coming home tonight, Jessica. I need time to think about what kind of life I want to build." After he hung up, Michael sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for letting her convince me that our family traditions weren't valuable. I'm sorry for standing by while she insulted you and humiliated other family members. I'm sorry for almost throwing away everything that makes our family special." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Michael, what matters is that you found your way back. That's what family is for. We're here when you're ready to come home." Margaret returned to the room, tactfully pretending she hadn't overheard the emotional conversation. But I could see the understanding in her eyes. She had built her own business partly to escape family expectations that didn't align with her values, and she recognized the courage it took for Michael to make a similar choice. Over the next few days, Michael stayed in my guest room while he sorted through his feelings about his marriage. Jessica called repeatedly, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. She couldn't understand why he was choosing old recipes over their future together, still unable to grasp that this wasn't about food. It was about respect, values, and the right to maintain connections to his heritage. During this time, something unexpected happened. Word of our family crisis had somehow reached the local food community, perhaps through one of the restaurant owners we supplied. Instead of judgment, we received an outpouring of support from customers, fellow food entrepreneurs, and even competitors who shared similar stories of family members who didn't understand their passion for traditional foodways. A local food blogger wrote a piece about the emotional significance of family recipes and the courage required to preserve them in the face of criticism. She quoted several readers who shared their own experiences of feeling ashamed of their family's food traditions until they realized their unique value. The piece went viral in food circles, generating hundreds of comments from people who had felt pressured to abandon or improve their heritage recipes. The unexpected publicity brought us more attention than any marketing campaign could have achieved. Orders increased dramatically, and we had to add evening production shifts to keep up with demand. More importantly, the response showed Michael that he wasn't alone in valuing tradition over trends. Hundreds of people understood exactly what he was choosing and why it mattered. A week after his confrontation with Jessica, Michael made his decision. He filed for separation, citing irreconcilable differences about fundamental values and life priorities. Jessica was shocked. She had expected him to eventually cave to her demands, as he had so many times before. She couldn't believe he would throw away their marriage over some old recipes. But Michael understood, as I was learning to understand, that this was never really about recipes. It was about respect for heritage, appreciation for craftsmanship, and the right to value things that brought meaning to your life, even if others couldn't see their worth. The divorce proceedings were difficult, as they always are. Jessica fought for half of any potential future earnings from Eleanor's kitchen, claiming that Michael's involvement made her entitled to a share of the business. Her lawyers argued that family recipes were community property and that she had contributed to their development through her culinary expertise and suggestions for improvement. Margaret's legal team successfully argued that Eleanor's kitchen existed independently of Michael's marriage and that Jessica had actually hindered rather than helped its development through her constant criticism and discouragement. They presented evidence of Jessica's public dismissal of our recipes, including her blog posts mocking traditional cooking methods and her recorded statements calling our food outdated peasant cuisine. The judge was particularly influenced by testimony from customers and industry professionals about the authentic value of our preserved traditions. Several chefs testified that Jessica's suggested improvements would have destroyed the essential character that made our products special. The James Beard Foundation submitted a letter supporting the cultural significance of preserving unmodified heritage recipes. In the end, Jessica received no claim to Eleanor's kitchen, but she did get a substantial settlement from Michael's other assets. More importantly for all of us, the legal proceedings clarified that our family recipes remained protected as trade secrets, preventing Jessica from attempting to replicate and commercialize them independently. Throughout this difficult period, our business continued to grow beyond anything we had imagined. We opened our second commercial kitchen, hired 24 employees, and expanded our product line to include seasonal specialties like my mother's Christmas stollen and Easter cardamom cookies. Margaret negotiated contracts with specialty food distributors on the East Coast, and we began planning our first company-owned retail location. The success allowed me to do something I had dreamed of: create a scholarship fund for young people interested in learning traditional food preservation techniques. We partnered with local culinary schools to offer apprenticeships that focused on heritage recipes and artisanal methods rather than contemporary fusion trends. The program attracted students who felt disconnected from the cookie-cutter curriculum of mainstream culinary education. Hey, I'm curious to know, from which city and country are you following this story? Write it in the comments below. I love hearing from people around the world who understand the importance of preserving family traditions. Michael threw himself into his new role at Eleanor's Kitchen with an enthusiasm that reminded me of his childhood curiosity. He started as a production assistant, learning every aspect of our operations from ingredient sourcing to final packaging. His business background proved invaluable as we navigated the complexities of expansion, and his genuine passion for our mission impressed employees and customers alike. Watching him knead dough with the same focused intensity he once brought to his corporate projects, I realized how much happier he seemed. The constant tension that had characterized his marriage was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection that had been missing from his life for years. 6 months after his divorce was finalized, Michael met Sarah Chen, Margaret's cousin, who worked in sustainable agriculture consulting. Sarah understood immediately why someone would choose family traditions over social expectations. Her own family had immigrated from Taiwan and struggled to preserve their cultural identity while assimilating to American life. Sarah and Michael bonded over their shared appreciation for the intersection of heritage and innovation. She helped us develop relationships with local organic farms that could supply ingredients meeting our quality standards while supporting sustainable agricultural practices. Her expertise allowed us to tell an even richer story about our commitment to community and environmental responsibility. The contrast between Sarah and Jessica was striking. Where Jessica had tried to diminish and modernize our traditions, Sarah sought to understand and honor them. She spent hours in my kitchen, learning not just the recipes, but the stories behind them, the cultural context that gave them meaning, and the techniques that made them special. When Sarah asked to learn the apple cinnamon roll recipe, her approach was completely different from Jessica's had been. Instead of suggesting improvements, she asked questions. Why did we use this particular type of flour? What was the significance of the 45-minute rising time? How had the recipe adapted to ingredients available in America versus Sweden? Her genuine curiosity and respect made me realize how hungry I had been for someone who valued our family's knowledge rather than dismissing it. Sarah understood that these recipes weren't just instructions for making food. They were documents of cultural adaptation, family survival, and the evolution of taste across generations. As our relationship deepened, Sarah began contributing to Eleanor's Kitchen in her own way. She researched the historical context of our recipes, helping us tell more complete stories about the immigrant experience and cultural preservation. Her work added depth to our marketing materials and attracted customers who were interested in the broader historical significance of heritage foods. A year after Michael's divorce, Eleanor's Kitchen achieved something that still amazes me. We were invited to cater a reception at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. The event was part of an exhibition about immigration and cultural preservation, and our apple cinnamon rolls were featured as an example of how food traditions travel and evolve across generations. Standing in that prestigious venue, serving our family's recipes to museum curators, historians, and cultural preservationists, I thought about Jessica's dismissive words from that devastating Easter dinner. She had called these recipes heart attacks on a plate and suggested they belonged to a bygone era. Yet here they were, being celebrated as important cultural artifacts that help tell the story of America itself. The museum's curator of cultural history approached me during the reception, expressing interest in acquiring some of our original recipe cards and family photos for their permanent collection. These documents represent the lived experience of American immigration, she explained. They show how families preserved their cultural identity while adapting to new circumstances and ingredients. I agreed to donate copies of our materials, but insisted on keeping the originals. Those yellowed recipe cards, covered in my grandmother's careful handwriting and my own additions, were still actively guiding our daily production. They weren't museum pieces. They were living documents that continued to nourish people every day. Margaret, meanwhile, had been fielding increasingly serious inquiries from investors interested in franchising Eleanor's Kitchen nationally. Major grocery chains wanted to carry our products in their premium sections. Food service companies proposed partnerships to supply our goods to restaurants and institutions. Publishing companies competed to offer book deals for our collected recipes and family stories. The attention was flattering, but it also forced us to confront difficult questions about growth and authenticity. How could we expand while maintaining the handcrafted quality that made our products special? How could we preserve the personal touch that customers valued while meeting massive demand? How could we stay true to our family's traditions while building a national brand? These weren't just business decisions. They were questions about values, legacy, and the responsibility that comes with success. I found myself in the unexpected position of being the guardian not just of my family's recipes, but of the broader principle they represented. That traditional knowledge has value, that craftsmanship matters, and that some things are worth preserving exactly as they are. After months of deliberation, we made a decision that surprised many of our advisors. Instead of pursuing aggressive expansion, we chose sustainable growth that prioritized quality over quantity. We would expand to new markets gradually, ensuring that each new production facility could maintain our standards. We would train franchise partners extensively, requiring them to demonstrate not just business acumen, but genuine appreciation for our mission. Most importantly, we established the Eleanor's Kitchen Foundation, dedicated to preserving traditional food knowledge and supporting food entrepreneurs from immigrant and indigenous communities. The foundation would fund research into heritage recipes, provide scholarships for traditional cooking techniques, and create a repository of family food stories that might otherwise be lost. The Foundation's first major project was a collaboration with the Library of Congress to document endangered family recipes from communities across America. We sent teams of food historians and oral tradition specialists to record elderly cooks sharing their knowledge, creating an archive that would preserve these culinary treasures for future generations. The irony of our success wasn't lost on me. Jessica had spent months trying to convince me that my recipes needed modernization to appeal to contemporary tastes. Yet our refusal to change them was exactly what made them valuable to modern consumers who were hungry for authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. Our commitment to preservation over innovation attracted customers who understood that some things don't need improvement, they need protection. These customers became passionate advocates for our brand, sharing our products with friends and family members who shared their values. 3 years after that humiliating Easter dinner, Eleanor's Kitchen had grown from a small local operation to a multi-million-dollar company with national distribution. We employed over 100 people across 6 production facilities, and our products were available in specialty stores from Seattle to Miami. But the measure of our success wasn't just financial. We had sparked a broader conversation about the value of traditional knowledge and the importance of cultural preservation. Food bloggers wrote about the Eleanor's Kitchen effect, describing how our success had inspired other families to reclaim and commercialize their heritage recipes. The most gratifying aspect of our growth was watching Michael flourish in his new role. He had become our Director of Heritage Preservation, responsible for maintaining the authenticity of our recipes while overseeing quality control across all production facilities. His corporate experience had prepared him well for managing complex operations, but his renewed connection to our family traditions gave his work deeper meaning. Michael and Sarah announced their engagement during our 4th annual company retreat, held at a farm in Colorado that supplied our organic flour. As they exchanged vows, surrounded by employees who had become like extended family, I thought about the different paths my son's life might have taken. If he had stayed with Jessica, he would probably still be working in a corporate job that provided financial security but little personal fulfillment. He would have continued distancing himself from family traditions that his wife couldn't appreciate. He might have achieved conventional success, but at the cost of losing connection to the things that gave his life meaning. Instead, he had chosen a path that honored his heritage while building something new. He had found a partner who celebrated rather than diminished his family connections. He had discovered work that combined his professional skills with his personal values. Most importantly, he had learned to trust his own judgment about what mattered in life. As I watched Michael and Sarah cut their wedding cake, made, of course, using my grandmother's vanilla cake recipe, I realized that this was what success really looked like. Not just the business achievements or financial rewards, but the preservation of family bonds, the creation of meaningful work, and the courage to choose authenticity over acceptance. Jessica had attended the wedding, surprisingly. Her own life had taken unexpected turns since the divorce. Her food blog had struggled to find an audience, perhaps because her elevated recipes lacked the emotional connection that made food memorable. She had eventually abandoned culinary pursuits altogether, returning to her previous career in marketing. At the reception, she approached me during a quiet moment, her manner subdued and thoughtful. "Linda," she said hesitantly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your recipes, about your family's traditions. I was so focused on what I thought was sophisticated that I couldn't see what was actually valuable." I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but found only genuine regret. "I've been following the success of Eleanor's Kitchen," she continued. "I've read the articles about cultural preservation and traditional knowledge. I understand now that I was trying to fix something that wasn't broken." "Thank you for saying that, Jessica," I replied carefully. "It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quickly. "I know I caused a lot of pain, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I missed, what I threw away." As the evening continued, I watched Jessica observing the celebration from the periphery. She seemed genuinely moved by the warmth and connection that characterized our extended Eleanor's Kitchen family. Perhaps for the first time, she was seeing what authentic community looked like. Not the curated sophistication she had always pursued, but the deep bonds formed through shared values and mutual respect. Later that night, as I helped clean up after the reception, I found Jessica in the kitchen, carefully copying the recipe for my grandmother's vanilla cake from the card I had used to make the wedding cake. "May I?" she asked, holding up her phone to photograph the handwritten instructions. I nodded, watching as she studied the recipe with the same attention she had once devoted to criticizing my techniques. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "The handwriting, the little notes in the margins, the way you can see the love in every word." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 4 years ago, I had been a woman whose confidence was shattered by criticism from someone who claimed to know better. I had questioned the value of traditions that had been passed down through generations, wondering if maybe they really were outdated and inferior. But through building Eleanor's Kitchen, I had learned that authenticity doesn't need validation from others to be valuable. Traditional knowledge doesn't become less important because newer methods exist. Family heritage doesn't require anyone else's approval to be worth preserving. The success of our business had provided external validation, but the real victory was internal. The recovery of my confidence in my own judgment and the strengthening of bonds with family members who shared my values. Today, Eleanor's Kitchen continues to grow and evolve while staying true to its founding principles. We've opened a culinary school that focuses exclusively on traditional techniques and heritage recipes. We've established partnerships with immigrant communities to help them preserve and commercialize their own food traditions. We've created a cookbook series that tells the stories behind traditional recipes from dozens of different cultures. Michael now serves as our CEO, while I remain as Chief Heritage Officer, responsible for ensuring that our growth never compromises our authenticity. Sarah leads our sustainability initiatives, helping us maintain our commitment to environmental and social responsibility. Margaret continues as our Chief Operating Officer, the architect of our expansion and the guardian of our business principles. But beyond the corporate structure and impressive growth metrics, Eleanor's Kitchen remains what it started as: a family business built on respect for tradition, appreciation for craftsmanship, and the belief that some things are worth preserving exactly as they are. Every morning, when I walk into our flagship commercial kitchen and smell the familiar aroma of apple cinnamon rolls baking, I think about my great-grandmother Eleanor. She could never have imagined that the simple recipe she brought from Sweden would someday feed thousands of people across America, employ hundreds of workers, and inspire a national conversation about the value of cultural preservation. But I think she would understand the deeper significance of what we've built. Eleanor's Kitchen isn't really about selling baked goods. It's about honoring the past while building the future, preserving knowledge while sharing it generously, and proving that traditional wisdom has a place in the modern world. The woman who once laughed at my peasant food taught me an invaluable lesson, though probably not the one she intended. She showed me that criticism from people who don't share your values says more about them than it does about you. She demonstrated that sophistication without substance is ultimately hollow. Most importantly, she proved that the right people will always recognize authentic quality even when others can't see it. As I write this, our latest product line is about to launch, a collection of holiday cookies based on recipes from 5 different immigrant communities. Each cookie comes with a card telling the story of the family that preserved the recipe and the journey that brought them to America. It's our way of honoring not just our own heritage, but the countless families who have enriched American culture by sharing their traditions. The success of Eleanor's Kitchen has exceeded every dream I had when Margaret first walked into my kitchen 4 years ago. But the real success isn't measured in revenue or recognition. It's measured in the knowledge that our family's traditions will survive and thrive for generations to come. My granddaughter Emma, Michael and Sarah's daughter, is already showing interest in baking. At 3 years old, she can barely reach the counter even with a stool, but she loves to help measure ingredients and listen to stories about her great-great-grandmother Eleanor. Watching her tiny hands carefully pour flour into the mixing bowl, I see the continuation of a chain that stretches back over a century and will continue long after I'm gone. That's the true victory. Not just that our recipes found commercial success, but that they'll be passed down to another generation who will treasure them, preserve them, and perhaps find their own ways to share them with the world. The kitchen that once echoed with laughter now rings with the sounds of production, training, and celebration. But at its heart, it remains what it always was, a place where tradition meets innovation, where family heritage is honored and protected, where the simple act of making food becomes an act of love that nourishes both body and soul. And sometimes, late at night when the commercial kitchen is quiet and still, I can almost hear the voices of all the women who came before me, great-grandmother Eleanor, grandmother Anna, my mother Ruth, whispering their approval and their gratitude that their recipes, their stories, their love continue to feed the world. That's worth more than any amount of money, more valuable than any award, more satisfying than any recognition. Because at the end of the day, we're not just in the business of making food. We're in the business of keeping love alive, one recipe at a time.